Everybody. I decided to come downstairs and turn my spare bedroom into a classroom. So, take online learning into real life learning. A lot of people were asking about viruses and diseases and how those actually impact people and how do we get these viruses? What about COVID? What's happening with all of these pandemics? Like, what has there been more pandemics besides this? How does we even get these viruses? And there's so many questions, and it seemed like people were really interested in. And so, as a part of world history, we were going to start a new unit anyway on global issues, modern things that are impacting us. So, I guess like the rest of the year, we'll just live out whatever we seem to be talking about. It seems to happen. So here's what we're going to do. I just decided I would put together a little presentation here to teach you basically about the history of disease a little and talk about kind of viruses and how they work. And then tomorrow, what I'm going to do is live stream about one virus in particular that actually, if we paid attention to what happened with that virus, which, by the way, that virus, and I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but that virus is actually still considered a pandemic, so it hasn't even stopped. There are sometimes multiple pandemics going on at one time, but this pandemic is almost 40 years old, which is kind of crazy to think about. But anyway, I'm going to kind of just go back, talk to you a little bit about disease first, and then I'll get into viruses. And then tomorrow I'll do a live stream about that other virus. And then we can branch off of that to talk about COVID a little bit more. But COVID or coronavirus, all these viruses, we kind of need to understand how they arose to begin with before we can really unpack them. So hopefully this helps. If nothing else, some free learning, right? Okay, here we go. So the history of disease. Basically, how did we get sick? Or I guess if you want to look at it a different way, it's kind of the guidebook on how to get the day off school. Or right now, why in the heck do we even have a pandemic, right? So this is the problem. Disease is not something brand new, right? We've had diseases for a really long time, so let's talk about where those actually came from. All right, so first of all, before I go to that, there are lots of shared diseases that we share with animals, okay? So we share 65, for example, with dogs. We share 50 with cattle. We share 46 with sheep and goats. 42 with pigs, 35 with horses, 26 with poultry, so chickens, turkeys, all that kind of thing, right? And then rodents such as mice and rats are also attracted to these areas where these animals live, so then they come in contact with these animals and they're going to also help spread the disease. And they spread it through contact and also with fleas that live on those different animals. So all these diseases we share with animals, okay? So animals naturally have these diseases in their bodies, and that's just some of the big farm animals. I'm not even talking about animals like bats or wild animals that we don't necessarily think about eating, but they're maybe a part of traditional eating in different places or rural areas. Or for example, like you're living in the jungle, you're going to eat different things. It's not like you're going to go to the store and get a nice piece of chicken on a styrofoam tray, right? So I'm hunting my meat. It's totally different what I'm going to hunt versus like farm animals. So I did this just to show you. These are like common animals we're in contact with, and I just wanted you to understand that. Now, most of these animals, they have diseases, we don't usually get those. Usually if you have a really super compromised immune system, then you're starting to come in contact with these. But usually they kind of stay separate. But there are some times when viruses jump, right? And they jump from the animal world into the human world. And then if they make another jump, it goes animal to human, and then another jump would be human to human. Okay. All right, so the first cause that actually made this even start to happen was farming. So what happened with farming is that we're doing a few things. So here's your farmer, and it's basically, once we started farming, it was a one-way ticket to getting sick, okay? And the reason why that is because it's a cultivation of plants. So we start cultivating these plants, and we're slowly keeping these farms close by instead of just hunting and gathering. And then we start to domesticate animals. And animals basically were sent out into the fields and they would eat the leftover plants. So I harvest my crop. Now there's like little stubbles left. And so animals would go eat all of that. And now as they're walking over those plants, they're adding their dung or their poo, right, to the fields. But what happens is now that's getting mixed in with what the animals are in contact with and also what we come in contact with. So actually, we cultivated disease when we started domestication of plants and animals. Domestication meaning that we're growing them by ourselves, we're keeping them close by, we're changing their behavior patterns as far as animals, we're breeding them for our use, right? So we really are cultivating disease at the same time. So how did animals give disease to us through farming? Well, first, it's close contact with animals to begin with. So if I'm in close contact with them, I'm also touching them, I'm pulling feathers off, I'm butchering them, right? I'm using them as my food supply, so I'm consuming them, I'm butchering up that meat, so when I'm cutting up a piece of meat, I'm getting little cuts on my hand, and now whatever I've come in contact with, their blood, their germs, it's getting into my skin through those little tiny entry points where I might have a cut. But I'm also eating it, right? So I'm consuming it, and if it's not cooked right, then that could cause problems too. There are also parasites in the soil that get passed through deposited animal dung, and so those animals poop in the fields, and it was great because it was fertilizer, but then some of those parasites get stuck on that food, and then we're consuming that food. And this happens when you have like an E. coli breakout or something like that. There can be situations where this is still happening, where parasites are passed to us through the soil. And then also the use of animal byproducts. So if we're using part of the animal or the fat of the animal or the skin of the animal, anything that we might be using, that definitely is going to then start to cause us to get sick because we're in contact with that more. There's been outbreaks, for example, when the bird flu broke out. They realized that it was little kids whose job was to defeather chickens, but when they were pulling those feathers off, right, they were getting that bloody mess and getting poked with feathers, and they were getting contact straight from the birds. So it has to do with somehow coming in that close contact, okay? And I think world history, we did talk about that example at some point. Now, back in the day, okay, besides farming, and this is back in the day, I want to make clear, back in the day, but it can still be true, the second cause that gave us really this disease living with us is the living conditions. So permanent dwellings attracted disease. If you were moving around a lot, hunting and gathering, you weren't really going to have a mouse invasion in your house, okay? But rodents are going to start invading when you've got basically a permanent living structure. Many buildings had squalid conditions, meaning it was really not clean. People didn't have like Lysol and like Mr. Clean and paper towels, and like they didn't do that as much, right? And rats and mice were rampant, so they're looking for food sources, and then when they come in, they leave fecal matter, their poo, right? And they soak the environment also with urine. And so when you've got urine and fecal matter, that's going to come in contact with human touch, and now we're kind of combining those, right? Also, a long time ago, they used to have what was called tithe barns, and so people would bring their tithe money to the church, right, a percentage of their payment to the church, and it would be stored as grain. So like if I didn't have money, I'm bringing the priest a bag of grain, and then he would store it. Well, over time, that grain would actually become soaked in rat urine. So for a long time, like these tithe barns were a place where that source of that would happen. Also, animals were kept with humans inside at night, and so this adds to the terrible conditions because people thought, well, I don't want to get my cow stolen or my goat stolen or whatever, so they would just bring them inside to prevent theft. But now you're having that close human contact with that animal, but also any fecal matter that might be on that animal, because if you think about it, even if our dog or cat comes inside, right, they're not always perfectly clean. Also, clothes were not washed very often, so people had severe cases of body lice, and they would also, like their clothes, blankets, and mattresses were never free from bugs and lice, and so you're constantly getting that stuff into your living conditions all the time. Oh, I forgot I made it look like little bugs were on there. Okay, Most people only took a full bath 2 to 3 times in their lifetime. I know you're freaking out right now. You're like, wait, what, Mr. Guard? Well, you might take a partial bath once a month of like washing yourself off, but a long time ago, people actually thought you got sick if you took a bath. So people didn't really take full baths where you got submerged in a bathtub. Remember, showers were like way later, so I'm talking way back in the day. Baths were also seen, like, if you removed all your clothes and you got cold, you would get sick, and so that really freaked people out. And the other thing was bath water was often shared by numerous people. So if you've ever heard this saying, don't throw the baby out with the bath water, it's because whoever was the lead of the family, the father, would get to take a bath first. And then the mom would take a bath. And then everybody after that in line of age from oldest to youngest would take a bath. So the baby, which is really crazy, but the baby who is most vulnerable is going to take a bath last, right? So all that water would have bathed everybody in the household before you even bathed the baby, which definitely led to mortality rates being high among little children. So people got sick a lot. And the word disease actually comes from 2 words, at dis-ease. So if you said, I have a disease, it came from people going, well, I'm at dis-ease. Like, I'm dissatisfied. I'm unsatisfied. I'm uneased. I'm not feeling good, right? So that's where the word disease comes from. And so you would find a doctor, anyone who promised a cure for your ailment, right? And at that time, it might be a priest or a nun or a monk or a midwife. Could be a medicine man, a phlebotomist, which was a bloodletter. And a bloodletter would be somebody who would, like, cut you, and then using different kinds of things like, I can't think of it right now, leeches, right, or cupping. Like, they might use different things to actually try to let the blood out of your body, because they thought if you had a fever, if you let the blood out, then you might be healthier. Also might find somebody who could set the bones. You might find a butcher. Why a butcher? Because if I need to have an arm or a leg cut off, I'm not going to the priest. I want to go to the guy with the best knives, right? So a butcher would be that person I would go to. Also might go to someone who was considered a witch, because she might have some kind of spell or potion, right, that I could use. Or some kind of educated man. Not always an educated woman. Educated women were often considered witches. But an educated man might be someone else I would go to, right? So I'm trying to find anything to kind of cure myself. All right, so here's this chart. It shows a history of pandemics. And if you look at this, if I go back here, these are like the bigger the dot, the bigger the influence. So just to kind of give you an idea, COVID's right here, okay? And this dot is changing all the time. I noticed they changed this graphic like even in the past week as I found this graphic. So right here, these are the bigger ones that have happened, right? So back here at the top, and I'm going to blow this up in a second, you got bubonic plague is this purple one, smallpox, right? There's some couple of plagues in here. This right here is the 3rd big plague in the 1800s. This is Spanish flu, right? And Spanish flu is what was happening during World War I. So when we talked about that, that's World War I. This is HIV/AIDS. And right here is Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, and you'll be able to see these dates in a minute. Swine flu, Ebola is right here, SARS is right here, MERS is right here, right? So when you think about it, these things like HIV and Spanish flu and smallpox and bubonic plague are actually a lot more in terms of numbers. And back here, you're talking about the population wasn't that large either. So this wiped out half the population, right? So these are massive pandemics, and this is the one I was talking about that's still happening right now, one of the largest pandemics in the world, and it's still going on. 35 million people, right, have had HIV/AIDS. And so we're talking about a crazy amount of people that have had HIV or are living with it currently, and we'll talk more about that. But there are a lot of lessons that we should have learned here, and there are some I can see that we learned. I've studied this extensively, and so there are a lot of lessons we've learned, and I can see them putting in place. And when I kind of tell people about some of the things you should be doing as far as protecting yourself and being aware of viruses and how they move and transmit and why we need to do something like quarantining, it makes sense because of what I know here. And so some of those lessons we've learned, and we're trying to apply them. A little different than how HIV works, obviously. COVID's totally not even in the same realm of that. But it's important lessons that we needed to learn. Okay, so if I break this up so you can see it a little bit closer, it shows you how many. So these are like even other epidemics way back. So if I just start here, bubonic plague, 200 million people. That's in the mid-1300s, right? Smallpox, 56 million. That's in 1520, right? There were lots of plagues that kind of came in the 17th and 18th centuries. So that's about 3 million people. Great plagues in the 18th century. That's about 600,000 people. I'll just give you a second to look at that. And now if I go on, I broke this timeline in half so you can see it. Now this is a cholera outbreak that happened 1817 to 1923. That killed 1 million people. That's this little purple dot, sorry. And then the third plague that happened in the 1800s killed 12 million. And then I come to World War I, right? Oh, let me go back here. Yellow fever, that's 150,000 in the late 1800s. And now I come to Spanish flu. So 40 to 50 million people. This was 100,000. This is 12 million. This is 40 to 50 million people. And keep in mind, that is like crazy numbers at that time, right? That we watched some video of how freaked out people were, how people were dying, like that, the scariness of people just dropping over. You weren't sick one day, the next day you're dying. So 40 to 50 million. Then there was a Russian flu that killed about 1 million. And then you jump up here to HIV, and the first cases appeared in 1981, but actually we'll talk about it later. It goes way back further than that, but 1981 is kind of where they start counting, and it's still going on. It has not stopped. So there's a new case of HIV every 12 seconds in the world, and a new case in the United States every 9.5 minutes. Okay, so pandemics keep popping up. It's not brand new to have a pandemic. Asian flu, 1.1 million. This is in the 50s. Hong Kong flu, 1 million. This is in the 60s. And then you get here kind of to modern times. So SARS was 770 people. That was in 2002, 2003. And then we had swine flu in 2009 to 2010. And that was about 200,000 people. I actually had swine flu and recovered from that. MERS, 850, that was in 2012. To present, there's still some cases of MERS that pop up. And MERS and SARS and COVID are all kind of related, okay, in that family of coronaviruses. And then Ebola in 2014 to 2016, that was 11,000 people that got Ebola. And now we're at COVID, and right now we're over 10,000 people, right? So you can see that, like, it's on the Ebola level, but they're thinking this is going to be on this level, right? So they think this could become this. So why is it important? Because you're not looking at this as, oh, it's a baby, like there's nothing compared to these. No, they're thinking that it's going to be one of these big dots, not stay a little dot, okay? So what we've learned is that because of all of this, we don't want this to be a big dot. So stop. We cannot have this be a big dot. So what do we have to do? And SARS and MERS did not get out of control and spread internationally. And so right now we're going, okay, look, we stopped MERS, Ebola, and SARS from going everywhere. We need to not let COVID go everywhere. And so we don't want it to become big like these. I hope that makes sense. So again, just kind of gives you that timeline. So if we're talking about in ranking order, right, how many they killed, if you go down the line, right, you can kind of see that. So Black Death, smallpox, Spanish flu, plague of Justinian, HIV/AIDS, the third plague, Antoine plague, 17th century, Asian flu, Russian flu, Hong Kong flu, cholera, Japanese smallpox epidemic was a tiny one on there. 18th century plague, swine flu, yellow fever, Ebola, COVID, MERS, and SARS. Okay? So the whole point of trying to flatten the curve, the whole point of mandatory shut down. The whole point of staying inside, the whole point of social distancing is about not letting this dot become big dots, if I can put it in simplest terms, okay? 1 second here, this froze up again on me. Okay. So what I'm going to do is stop with that video, and then I'm going to make a second video on viruses and the basics, and then I'll upload all these so you guys can watch them, but I'm going to just break it up into smaller chunks, okay? So stay tuned if you want to check out viruses and the basics. That's coming up next on Ricard's Basement History Lessons, I guess? I don't know. All right. Hope that was helpful. Feel free to reach out with questions. All right. Bye.